So today's session, as I have said, stewardship and developing an impactful fundraising plan. And today I have a surprise for you. I'm going to be inviting someone to help me today for at least the next 20, 30 minutes to help me take you through stewardship. I think I have talked a lot. It's also helped to just hear someone else, other people, to hear their voices, to hear also, to give them an opportunity to also share. So to make our session interesting today, we are going to go through a stewardship session under the guidance of someone who is with us today, Sylvia Jambi. Sylvia is an experienced experienced professional in grant management, in resource mobilization, in strategic communication, event management. So when you have your events, Sylvia would come in very handy in partnerships and in stakeholder engagements. Sylvia is currently the partnership advisor at the Change the Game Academy. I think those who know Change the Game Academy, they're also in this space of fundraising, and they have done a lot of work around helping organizations. I'm sure some of you, I know I've interacted with quite a number of you who have also been worked with Change the Game Academy. So for us, we look at all the people in this space, not as competitors, but as collaborators. So we are collaborating, we are working in partnership to see how we can improve this environment of fundraising and support one another in our work. And so I'm excited to invite my friend and a colleague who is going to help me to take us through the next very important session on stewardship. And then after that, I'll take over and we continue with the fundraising plan. So let us welcome Sylvia.
Wow, thank you so much, and good evening to everyone who is on this call. I'm assuming we are all in a region that we are calling this time evening. If you're not in our time zone, good afternoon for anyone in a different time zone. Anybody in Latin America right now would be good morning for them, or slightly mid-morning. Thank you so much for being here today. I have been on this the bootcamp from day one. I mean, learning never stops. So for me also during this period, I've also been learning. I have picked a few things as much as I've been in the space, but I have also been picking a few things and learning. And Lucy has already introduced me, so I will not go into the details of introducing myself. I will just go dive into donor stewardship, having gone through the cycle of resource mobilization or fundraising cycle. We've had the identification process. We went into the details of that. We've done the cultivation, where you're really trying to engage and know the funders deeply. We went into solicitation, where you make your ask using different ways that Lucy discussed. And now we are at the stewardship stage, which you cannot get to this stage if you have not gone through this entire cycle. So by the time you're at the stewardship stage, it means you have already secured some funding. You already have existing relationships with funders. And as I speak about funders or donors, I might be using those terms interchangeably. It could mean from, and Lucy, I think, has alluded to this from the very go, look at it from the point of, it could be even funding you're getting from perhaps family members, or funding you're getting from sale of some merchandise, or there are people who are your clients from products that you've monetized as your organization and you're selling. So look at all those people as your supporters or funders, because those are the ones that are making you continue with the work that you are doing. So when you get to stewardship, before I ask us, because I'd like us to engage a little bit, I want us to ask ourselves, it's okay, you can go on, Lucy. I'd like us to ask ourselves, why do we go, or why do we seek services in the places that we do? For instance, if you have a vehicle, perhaps there's that mechanic you only trust with your car, you trust them for any advice they give you, and you have gone there year on year. And you do not, in fact, if they are not around you, you'd rather wait for them to come back. You perhaps seek a service, you go to a barber shop in your neighborhood or wherever it is, and you go there every day because there's something that there's a service that you get in that place. There are very many other barbers, but you appreciate, and there is something about the experience that you get with that particular service provider It could be, or that mechanic in this case, or the barber, the salonist, whoever it is. And when you have that kind of a relationship, trust you me, if you even went there without money to pay for that service, there's a high chance you would still get the service with the hope that you'll be able to you'll be able to pay that at a later date, because you have built a relationship with that person, and they trust you, and they believe that when you tell them I'll pay this by the end of the month, they actually trust that. But it's because of a relationship you have created. If you just walked into any other place to ask for the same service and you've not been there before and asked for similar kind of treatment for maybe credit services, it's unlikely that you'll get that because they do not know you. And so what am I trying to say is that it is very easy to renew a partnership with an organization or an individual that you already know, as opposed to securing a new donor from scratch, because there's already a relationship. And I cannot overemphasize this, like, this is so important. And that way, I equate that to stewardship. You're a good steward to the funder. That person who gives you that service wherever you go is a good steward. There are things you like about them. They communicate, perhaps they have got good customer service. So it's the same case when you're stewarding. You are perhaps in constant communication with your funder. You give them feedback. Whenever there is a delay in something, you communicate, and they have already seen, you have established a relationship with that kind of a person. That's what we call stewardship. So I'd like us to maybe just type something on the chat. Whenever you hear of stewardship, what comes to mind? It could be a word, or what do you think in your space? What would you describe stewardship as we move on to, before we go to the next slide? I'm seeing being responsible, a promise, I like that. Trust, great. Accountability, fantastic. Care, taking care, commitment to service, accountability, being responsible, credibility, partnerships, and being prudent, taking good care of what you have been entrusted with, trust, transparency. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for all that feedback. And you can keep them. Being faithful, being a custodian, very important. Thank you for all that. So you have already mentioned a few things around what stewardship is. And for me, I like to narrow it down to 3 main ingredients. I call them ingredients. There could be many others, like what you have already mentioned. And one of them is openness. And when we speak about openness, I would give an example. For instance, we've been having protests the last couple of weeks. And what that has done, it has paralyzed a number of things. And almost every Tuesday and Thursday in the last couple of weeks was almost a day when you know there's nothing much you can do. Assuming you're implementing a project somewhere, maybe in an informal settlement in Nairobi or somewhere in northern Kenya, and perhaps you need to travel. So what that means, you're unable to travel to actually go, and your project team is unable to travel to go and implement that work. Perhaps you were supposed to go and collect some data. So what that does, it affects your timelines when it comes to your program implementation. This information, yes, could be out there in the public. The public would know that, even perhaps the funders are following from wherever they are, inside of this country or even outside. They could be following that they're protests. But it's important that you communicate to them and let them know that we're having this kind of a situation, and this has affected our activities. Our project team is not able to travel because of A, B, C, D. And for that reason, we envision us having a delay in terms of our implementation. Our timelines are being affected. So when you create that open communication, the funder already knows, and they're human beings. And Lucy has alluded to this before. They're human beings just like us. Sometimes we assume they are robots or machines that sit on the other side, but they're actually human beings. So being open and letting them know, don't assume that they will get it from the news. You are in a relationship with them. So let it come from you, and also let them know how it is affecting your work. Number 2 is trust. When we're being funded, the key thing that all funders have is resources, and in this case, money. They come with other things in terms of training that are not a non-monetary support, but funding or financial support is usually the main thing. And when you're trusted with funding, it is expected that you are actually going to use those resources in the ways that you agreed. Remember when you put your signature, as perhaps if you're the budget holder or of that particular grant, you had an agreement with that funder. So just being accountable with the resources. For instance, when we have what have we called the non-restricted funding, where you have the ability to, to play around perhaps with the funding in the ways that suit your organization best. It could be you want to recruit a new person to support with your M&E work, or you want perhaps to ask to get a consultant to support you with developing a strategic plan for your next 5 years, perhaps. But in the course of doing that, you realize you need perhaps to purchase some fuel, maybe a computer to support them with that. But you don't communicate that to your funder. It's sort of it's like you're diversifying the funding, and the funder is not happy with that, and you do not communicate. Actually, very many funders, if you divert funding, you could be doing the right thing, but you're doing something that is out of scope in terms of what the funder expected of you. You'll be breaking trust, and there'll be trust issues. And as is right now, there's a big conversation around trust-based philanthropy. Funders are still not at a place where they trust their grantee partners. And it's upon us as organizations and as nonprofits, as a civil society, as a CBO, for us to actually do our best in terms of promoting that trust so that people are always not doubting. Some of us, there's an organization I know of, I'll not mention the name, but I know their funding came to an end at some point abruptly because of trust issues. Money was not being spent in the right ways. There was even a court case because some, I think there was a lot of embezzlement of funds, I would call it. So let's not find ourselves in that space. Otherwise, we will not be great stewards. And what is going to happen? We'll not be able to renew our funders, and we'll also not be able to keep them even for the long term. And number 3 is transparency, which is very much related to trust, being open with what we are doing. Like now we had, I remember there was, there's a project one time I got engaged with, and there was a lot of attrition in the organization. So whenever there was attrition, especially with the project team, what happens if you've done this? By the time you hire, you recruit another person to get used to the role, time has passed. And you're supposed to be implementing your work, but you're not communicating this to your funder. So you're always telling stories. And the funder understands. They would know that attrition is possible. Or maybe you do not have an executive director who perhaps authorizes payments in terms of how your payments are done. And that is slowing down in terms of how money leaves the bank account to be able to do the project work. But you're not communicating that. So that brings a lot of issues. And your relationship will always be tainted between yourself and the funder. So I like to summarize this by saying that whenever you use these ingredients, and there could be many others, like the ones you've already shared on the chat, you'll always be able to understand the motivations of your funder over time. And that way, you're able to develop customized plans on how to steward them, how to engage with them in the long term. Remember, if you meet a funder today in the year 2024, it's unlikely that they will remain the same in 2026, for instance. Some things will have changed around them. Some things that excited them then are not exciting them now, or how they wanted things done that time has changed and they're doing them differently. And you can bring this even closer home. What you are, or the things that really you are passionate about perhaps 5 years ago, are not the same now. With COVID, we saw in 2012, from 2020, so many things have changed. So you do not expect to have a static plan or think that how you engage your funders that time is how you're going to engage them now. Things have evolved. And that's why it's really important to continuously do the things that we've talked about so that you're learning how they are evolving so that you can adapt accordingly. And also develop a plan that will be able to support you to be able to be a good steward for your funder. Remember, there's no one size fits all when it comes to stewarding. How you engage with a funder who has joined now, this month in your organization is very different from how you're engaging a funder you've had for the last 2 years, or a funder who will join you in March. And as we're thinking about this part of stewardship part of the cycle. Something else we also need to important, there's no one time you say that in January or in December, that's when I do stewardship. At any given time, you'll always find yourself doing all the 4 things at the same time for the different funders, because these funders are coming in at different times. So you must always be prepared to engage your funders in the different ways based on how they come. So at the beginning of every year, and this is a practice I have done in my work, always look at the funders that you have currently in your pipeline who are funding you, and develop a calendar. I call it a calendar or a plan on how you intend to engage your funders, and be very systematic. From January up to December, how do you want to engage them? Your new funders, your individuals, your corporates, how do you want to engage them? Your multilaterals, if you're working with any multilaterals, how do you want to engage with them? If you have bilaterals, for instance, or you have foundations that you're working with, you have implementing partners. Sometimes we work with CBOs, and we have a CBO within our community that you have complementing projects, and you work together. Those are also great partners. You also need to find a way of stewarding them. I just wanted to share how I segment my funders, and there are many ways of coming around it. For me, I prefer to use an Excel sheet. You could decide whatever way you want to come up with. And I come up with how I want to interact with them. I have a section on what you can see here to the far left, the interactions. And I have acknowledgements. Acknowledgements is when you want to say thank you, when you want to maybe welcome somebody has just become part of your team, as part of your funders. You're welcoming them to part of the community. Then there's reporting, there's recognition, and then there's what we'll be doing regularly. But what I want to focus on more importantly is how to plan all this. Like I said, there's no one size fits all. So for instance, on my calendar, I have put all the months from January to December. And then I say, for the new donors in January, I have New Year regards and maybe a welcome note from the CEO. In February, you have coffee with the CEO. And this is just for that personal engagement, especially if there are people who are within your space. If you're in Kenya and you have your funder who has offices in Kenya, please, you have no reason not to, to have coffee with them. In March, I plan to have a courtesy visit, maybe in their office, if they're in a place I can travel. In April, remember, I have, you see, for instance, for the new donor, I have not put anything for the new donors to do in April. Because I've already seen that between January and March, I have really engaged them. Then in May, I do you can invite them to have some volunteer or community work that you're doing. It could be you're planting trees. Invite them to plant trees with you. And then at the mid-year, if you have not done any other reports, you can do a mid-year report and share with them. Then you can do a donor survey. Perhaps you would like to know how to engage them more, or what are the new things that perhaps they would like to see. And then you invite them to participate in that. You might want to do a gala dinner at some time in the year for fundraising. Invite them to be part of that. And then in September, you can have a gala dinner, a newsletter. And then again, if you have another event that you can invite them to be part of, it could be you do scholarships and you have just, what is it called? You do scholarships and you have just released, or there's a group of students who are sitting for their exams, and you're inviting them for a day, like for commissioning them, invite them for that. And then Thanksgiving and a holiday appreciation. But this is just to mention, there could be very many other things you can engage in. And I've just mentioned one, and it goes on for all the others. For corporates, it's different. For government, if you're working with government, how are you going to engage with them? Foundations, and so on and so forth. So finally, donor cultivation. When you do proper cultivation of your funders, you'll definitely be able to solicit funding from them. And then plus proper stewardship will equal to great donor retention. Remember, if you remember at the very beginning, you're better off dealing with the same person over and over. It has its downsides as well, as opposed to investing new energy to recruiting new ones. So recruit new ones as you already have yours. It's not because there is attrition. You are just recruiting new ones because you need, perhaps your budget has grown over time, or you have new needs, or you are scaling to a new country or a new county. That should be the only, perhaps some of the reasons that may require you but to maybe to scale in terms of the funders, but not because your funders are falling out. We do not want your funders to fall out. So we, at the end of all this, we are looking at getting 100% retention of our funders. I'm sure we've heard of organizations that have been funded by certain organizations for years. There could be many other reasons why they've been funded for years, but I can tell you for a fact, one of the reasons they have done this is because they have maintained great relationships. They've had, they've been able to build that relationship, and that's why it's grown over years. And another thing, benefit you'll get from this is whenever, and I think I had this question asked yesterday, what do you do when an organization says they do not, unsolicited proposals are not accepted? How you can be part of that pool of, for you to be invited or are on invite only, is because funders speak. The same way we are here as fundraisers and resource mobilizers, funders also have their own communities, and they speak to each other and they ask each other, we have this funding and we are looking for an organization in the Global South, specifically perhaps in the East Africa region. Would you be having an organization in mind in Kenya or in Uganda or wherever that is working with communities in the informal settlements or communities in the ASAL regions? Then if you have a good relationship with that funder already, they will be able to give your name and say, work with organization ABCD. They are good. We have had a great relationship with them. We can make an introduction. That's how you end up into that bucket of those who get invite only calls. Next slide is on the different strategies we can use, and I have already alluded to them as I was taking you through the plan. And I'm sorry if I feel rushed. I'm sure we'll have more of this, but one of them is phone calls. And nowadays in this era of technology, nobody has a reason to not to say that they cannot afford to make phone calls. It doesn't have to be a phone call as I put it here. It could be a Zoom call like what we are having right now. It could be on WhatsApp. Talk to your donors. Tell them, can we have it's a beginning of the year. How can we just have a call to touch base to just let you know where we are at with ABCD and how far we have come and the plans that we're having this year. Perhaps we even have a new project team because we want to grow it so that we are able to give more time to the project. I mean, just having those kinds of conversations and then sharing our impact stories. And you can take any form. It could be written in a newsletter. It could be a video that you're sharing with them and all the other forms that we can use. There are many. One-on-one meetings. One thing I did, and it really, the funder really appreciated, and this, if your budgets allow as an organization, it's something I would recommend, is visiting your funders where they are. In most cases, they're the ones who come to see our projects. They travel from very far and wide. Some will come from Europe, others will come from America to come and see our work, which is okay because perhaps that's part of the work that they are doing. But once in a while, if your budget allows as an organization, or you can budget for this, send one of your team representatives to do, it's a nice way of stewarding. Go and visit them in Europe, wherever they are. And you can even group several of them. You have 5 of them in America. Make it a tour. It's a tour your organization perhaps is having as you go and meet these funders to let them know what you're doing. It says a lot and it creates such a lasting impact. We've done this somewhere I worked and it was really, really successful. And some of those funders, I don't think have ever left the organization up to date. And then courtesy visits, do that. If Safaricom, you're working with Safaricom, I mean, plan with them to do a courtesy visit in their office or invite them to your place. And then acknowledging gifts. You'll agree with me if your friend calls you today to ask you for 20,000 shillings and you send them and they, for some reason, they do not say thank you, you'll not be amused or you'll not be pleased with them. So acknowledge gifts, no matter how small, say thank you and tell them this gift, this 10,000 shillings is actually going to support one girl from our community to be able to have a full year of schooling. Let them know that. And then of course, newsletters and reports, these many organizations do. but always look for new ways of also doing them. Nowadays, technology has many platforms, many tools, templates that we can use to make our newsletters and reports very exciting, less monotonous, and also very, very impactful. And I will post there. I think in case of any questions, you can drop them on the chat. And I'll pass the mic back to Lucy. Thank you so much.
That was really great. I have learned personally, when I tell you there's so much to learn about fundraising, there's just so much. And that's why we need so many of us to be, specializing in different areas. We have already actually finished the 4 phases, if you remember. We started with identification on day 1. We did cultivation. Yesterday, we covered the solicitation strategies, and where we did a lot on proposal writing and all the other many strategies. And just to mention also that Sylvia is very good with events. We talked about annual events and special events as one of the methods that we should be using. So you can see there's a lot that we can learn from one another, and we have now covered stewardship. I will not add or subtract. I have personally learned. I had never thought that I could actually take a tour to go and visit a donor. That was really a aha moment for me. So thank you so much, Sylvia. All right, so let's continue with our presentation for today. When we post the question in the survey, do you have a fundraising plan? Here are the results. Let's see. 87% do not have a formal fundraising plan. And like we say, if we do not have a plan, it's very hard for us to be focused. It's very hard for us to know how to move forward and what activities to be done, what is not going to be done. And so what happens in many cases when you do not have a plan is that we tend to do things, whatever comes our way, to react. Remember the 10% that we talked about? The iceberg, 10% only that is visible. So we will keep reacting, because we do not have a strategic way. And if you've listened even to what Sylvia has talked about, even in stewardship, in every section, you must have a clear plan of what you want to achieve. It doesn't have to be extremely detailed, depending on your level. If you're a startup, we just want a pager. If you can afford you're a big organization, you have a lot you can do within 1 year, then you could have as long as you want it. But bottom line, irrespective of how big, irrespective of how small you are, whatever you are able to do, please have a plan, even if it has just 2 activities. So what I will give you is a guide of what we can have in our fundraising plan. So what is a fundraising plan to start with? So it outlines how you intend to raise money to support your mission and goals. So at the end of the day, it's about your mission. It's about raising resources to support your mission. And I know I've emphasized this a lot. I know a number of you now appreciate, for those who did not appreciate, the importance of being guided, having a clear mission and being guided by your mission. So it's a roadmap to guide fundraising activities over a specific period of time. Typically 1 year, you can do 3 years depending on how your capacity. But you as simple as 1 year, and include your goal, your strategies, and timeline. So how do we go about developing a fundraising plan that is, it's not just a document, it is going to help us. The first step is that you assess your current situation. As always, we start by always doing some level of assessment. This could just be sitting down with your board members, and if you are a startup, it could mean sitting down, of course, with your stakeholders, depending on your level, as I keep saying, but review your past strategies with your teams. What worked well? What strategy? What worked well maybe in the previous 1 year? What did not work well? So we think around what really worked well, so that what worked well, we can carry it forward. What did not work, we want to reduce or to not do it. We learn from what did not work well, and we see how we can adjust it, how we can apply it moving forward if we really need to move forward. So for example, you could review and see, your corporate sponsorship program was really good. You had some, connections, you made some good connections that you can build on moving forward. You could look at your strategies and see maybe the annual event was not really effective, absolutely was not effective. Then you want to ask yourself, well, how can we make it better this year? Is it that we did not have enough time to plan? What went wrong? What went right? So having that doing what we call a reflection is very important always. I think we know that in everything that we do, and the same applies in fundraising. After that, then we define our goals. What do we want to achieve this year? So, based on your mission, based on your strategic plan, what is it that you really want to achieve? And this again would depend. You could just be wanting to raise money to start up your office. It just depends on where you are, but you could also be having, wanting to raise 50 million. So it just depends, but you need to be very clear. What is it that I want to focus on? What is my main goal that we want to focus on this year? So an example, you could say that we want to raise 50 million USD. I know now I've given it at a higher level, but we said we are all in different levels, so we are going to have examples all around. So raise USD 50 million through a combination of individual donations, corporate sponsorships, and grant funding by the end of the fiscal year. So if, of course, this would be for an organization already with established systems. You have individual, an established system for individual funding. So you have that program. You have maybe a corporate program with a team who deals with corporates, and maybe you have another team dealing with grants. So then you can afford to say, this is what we really want to achieve this year. But as I said, you could also just say, this year we want to establish a monthly giving program that gives us 2,000 Kenya shillings per month. It is still fine. So define what is it that you want to achieve within this year. Increased donor retention could be another example. We want to increase our donor retention from 45% to 60% by implementing targeted engagement. I think Sylvia has clearly enlightened us on the importance of donor retention. Any donor, like she said, even if it's a Fred member who gave you 1,000 shillings, you need to see how do you retain them. And one way is, of course, saying thank you. Simple. I think we had even talked about it previously. So you could decide we want to retain donors, because donor retention is always far much cheaper than acquiring a new donor. And there is a lot of metrics that we can go to show that, the amount of time you invest going for all these meetings, calculating, creating relationships, inviting them, calling them, and everything. You invest a lot to create relationships, as we talked about, cultivation. So you can imagine you lose all that when you just let them go, and by not just maintaining them. So stewardship becomes very important, so that we can ensure we retain, we cultivate, we steward them, and then we will then ensure we have a high percentage of donor retention. So this was just to help us think through when we are thinking about our goal for our fundraising. We start with our mission, like I said. So we are asking ourselves, why do we exist? Could be we exist to reduce the burden of malaria, just an example, among the vulnerable groups. So you ask yourself, why do you exist? What is your mission? And then once you know what is your mission, you think through your strategic plan. I was just trying to show you how you align with your strategic plan. So what are the key pillars to our work? So our mission is to eliminate or to reduce the burden of this disease. One of our strategic pillars is to distribute 50,000 mosquito nets to underserved populations, for example. So then, your strategic pillars could be one or two, depending on your capacity that you want. Which strategic pillars are we working on? Or you could be having maybe 5 of them, and then you just want to make sure that all of them are covered in one way or another. So then the next question you ask yourself, then how do we raise the funds to help us achieve this? And that is where now the fundraising plan comes in. Maybe you could say this year we want to raise 5 million, 50 million USD, 5 million Kenya shillings to buy the mosquito nets. And then we want to raise this one to do this. Then you'll have the total amount of money. And this is where I was saying that we must know what we want and not wait for what is available. Because when we know what we want to achieve, we are going to be focused. We will not be waiting for calls for proposals to, come up and respond to them. That will be just an addition. We will be looking for these 5 million shillings that we need to achieve our goal. And therefore, we'll be looking at other fundraising strategies that are going to maintain us so that we can achieve our mission, which is our what we want to do. I think Sylvia also mentioned the importance of segmenting your donors. I'll not go into the details, but this is another step that we need to have. Why? Because every donor is going, the strategy for donors, and I think by now we appreciate that, the strategy for each type of donor is going to be different. So you have in your fundraising plan, there will be strategies for individuals, there will be strategies for the corporates and for foundations, and you'll have different strategies to, for each one of them. Like I said, again, depending on your level, you don't have to target all of them. If you're starting, you start with one program. You could even just start with individuals. And then that could be through maybe events. And then once you have established that, you introduce another program, maybe your monthly giving program. Then once you have an established programs, you're able to meet your basics, you're developing your portfolio, then you could say, now we have portfolio, we can now show impact. Remember Benson Michel's graphic that we did day one? If you missed it, please go back to day one, replace and watch that. It is as a result of your impact. The money is a byproduct of your impact, your relationships, and all the many things we talked about. So segment them and segment them so that then you have different strategies for each donor. Develop targeted strategies. So once we have that, now you can tailor your strategies to each type of donor, and then you align with the 4 phases of the fundraising cycle. Basically, that is what I wanted to show you, because at times when you don't do a fundraising plan, you might start wondering now, where do I start? I will show you practically how you do that. And then, of course, you need to have a timeline, like you've been shown by Sylvia. You need to have a timeline for all your activities, and also assign responsibilities, just like a work plan. And of course, we will have a budget. Estimate the costs associated with each fundraising activity, including staff time, marketing, materials, event expenses, and technology. You can go to all these because it's like marketing, must have a budget also for your marketing. I think in fundraising, we say 5 to 10% of your budget should go to fundraising. So if you do not have a budget, because all these activities that you're going to have, they will need to be also, funded. If you're going to run an event and you want it to be successful, then you have to have budget for the communication materials, for running the ads, for the many things that you need to do before you launch it to the public. So it's an expensive affair. So you must have a budget. And that's what I'm saying. If you're starting, you start with one program, you develop it, and then you move to another one. But make sure you have some budget for that. Of course, as standard, we always evaluate and reflect. We start with reflection and we always end with reflection. What is working well, what is not going on well. At the end of the year, make sure, or even as you go along, as you finish your events, make sure that you are evaluating and reflecting on what is happening and also documenting what you are learning. I don't want it to be complicated because I know fundraising strategies can be very big documents that will never get used. A real fundraising strategy plan, you'll find it has all these components. You'll have an executive summary, a fundraising goal, your situation analysis where you see what is happening, your target audience, your fundraising strategies, your marketing and communication. So it's a lot. It can be a lot. But if you do not have the resources, the capacity, to do all this, to hire someone to come in and even do for you your M&E plan, your contingency plan, because fundraising strategy, but the one thing you realize about fundraising, it has a lot to do with communication. There's a lot of communication and also M&E work that is, they're integrated to some extent. You can't really say you're doing fundraising without communication because it's about raising money, it's about asking, there's a lot of communication work that goes into it. So recognition of all these and the many other strategies and the many other policies that organizations are supposed to do. For us as an organization, we want to make it as easy and simple, especially for the grassroots organizations, for the organizations that may not have all these big systems. So we want to make it as easy for you. And that's why we came up with a template that we call a simple, easy to use, practical template that can guide you in your fundraising. So it's guided by the fundraising cycle. It helps us to align to our mission and our goals, and it also helps us to segment our donors. And I will be actually sharing with you that, including a free plan. So first, you need to have a goal. It needs to be somewhere. I think it was cut off during the repackaging of materials. You need to have a goal. So you could say our goal is to raise 50 million Kenya shillings for this and this and this and this, like the examples I give. Then what are our key activities? Our activities are going to be guided by the 4 fundraising phases that we talked about. So you look at phase 1, is identification and mapping of donors. So you ask yourself, what am I going to do under this component? I think we covered it in detail on day 1, but I'll still give you a sample with many examples. So you identify your activities under identification and mapping, depending on your level, what we want to do. Could be you want the starting point. Remember the first step. After you know what you want, you need to compile a list of your past donors, your prospect donors, and all that. So identify the activity. Of course, every activity you need, where it's possible, you need to have a target. You need to have who is going to be doing this and who is going, and what is the timeline. So you can have the timeline in terms of from January to December. And then you allocate just like a work plan. The one I'll share with you will be quite detailed in your resource toolkit. So you have the identification as the first phase. Then you go again to cultivation and relationship building and ask yourself, what activities are we going to do under this component? And here is where now you could segment, like you've seen, we have segmented. So under individuals, we are going to hold one-on-one meetings with the major donors that we have, and then you can be very specific when. I think Sylvia already gave us some ideas that we can do. I will also combine with what I have and share with you more ideas. Then you ask yourself, if you have a corporate program, what are we going to do around corporates? Maybe corporates, you're just going to be sharing. There are many activities, but one of them could be you're going to be sharing quarterly newsletters with success stories. If your foundations or institutions that you're working with, or maybe one activity could be maybe for relationship, you're going to be doing new introduction to 2 foundations you want maybe to venture or to expand your donor base. So that could be an activity. So this is just a summary to give you an idea, but like I said, I'll share. So when it comes to solicitation of funds, which is I know was a big topic yesterday, again, under individuals, what projects or what are we going to do? Could be the plan for this year. We are going to hold an annual fundraising event, and we have a target. We want to raise maybe 15 million USD dollars during that event. You now have then the person who is responsible, or the team will be the team leader. When it will be happening, you have the time. Maybe you want to establish your monthly giving program, targeting 100 recurring donors, giving 1,000 per month, as simple as that. Then you decide that is what you're going to target. So the number of activities will really depend on your bandwidth. So you have activities for individuals, you will have activities under maybe foundation, you want to write 5 grants. But remember, you are writing grants to organizations that you have created some level of relationship with and that meet the LEA criteria. If you missed day 1, please go back to day 1 and then you'll understand what the LEA criteria is all about. The linkages, the interest, we dealt with that in details. Then you look at your corporates again, what specific activities are you going to do under the corporate sponsorship program? What is your target? And I think with that, you get the idea of how a fundraising plan, a very simple fundraising plan that does not confuse. You don't have to write so much, but if you have this, especially if you do not have the capacity, the bandwidth, if you just have this and you've really thought through it properly, you'll be able to pick, even if they're just 5 activities that you're going to run with, you're going to focus your energy on, and then you'll not waste your energy, running everywhere and doing things that do not add value to your organization. And so, like I've mentioned, we have this easy to use and practical fundraising plan template. And as I promised, I know I've promised a lot of things, but trust me, you will get all these things. There'll be a package for you. You will see how it looks like. And I think with that, I want to bring this discussion to an end.